Marlene had always trusted her husband, Richard. But when she accidentally uncovered the truth about his infidelity with her cousin, Lena, the world she knew came crashing down. Her heart, once filled with love and loyalty, was now heavy with betrayal. She spent hours in silence, the hurt and anger brewing within her like a storm. Lena's face haunted her every thought, as did Richard's apologies, which felt more like excuses than genuine remorse. The discovery forced Marlene to confront the harsh reality of her marriage. She couldn't stay in a relationship where trust had been shattered beyond repair. As Marlene sat alone in their living room, the weight of the situation began to sink in. She had given everything to this marriage, and yet, it felt as though she had been living a lie. Richard tried to salvage their relationship, but his words were empty, and the love that once flourished between them felt like a distant memory. Marlene had no choice but to ask herself, could she ever forgive him? Was there any hope of rebuilding what they once had, or had the damage been too great? In the days following the revelation, Marlene retreated into herself. She couldn't bear to look Richard in the eyes without feeling the burn of betrayal. Her emotions swirled between anger and sorrow, and her heart struggled to find peace. She consulted friends and family, seeking advice, but no one could give her the answers she desperately needed. What made matters worse was the fact that her cousin Lena had been someone Marlene had trusted and loved like a sister. The pain of both the betrayal and the loss of her cousin was almost too much to bear. Marlene's mind was made up. She needed to leave. She couldn't live in a toxic environment where love was so easily discarded. Yet, the decision felt like a double-edged sword. She didn't want to break up her family, especially for the sake of their children. But could she continue to live with someone who had broken her heart so deeply? The finality of her decision brought a strange sense of relief and terror at the same time. Marlene knew that the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but she also knew that it was the only way forward. The divorce was harder than Marlene had ever imagined. As the months passed, she found herself weighed down by the legal proceedings, emotional turmoil, and the awkwardness of seeing Richard occasionally when they exchanged the children. Every interaction with him was a reminder of the love that once existed between them, and how it had now been reduced to a painful memory. Marlene began questioning everything about her marriage. Was she ever truly happy? Did she even know who Richard was anymore? The questions echoed in her mind like an unrelenting drumbeat. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, Marlene slowly found solace in her work. She had always been passionate about the community project she was involved in, restoring an old library building. The project had given her a sense of purpose when everything else seemed uncertain. It was here, amidst the dust and rubble of the old building, that Marlene began to feel a flicker of hope. Little did she know, this project would lead her down a path that would change her life forever. The restoration project was a massive undertaking, requiring the work of various volunteers and skilled tradespeople. Marlene often found herself at the site, overseeing the progress and ensuring that everything went smoothly. One morning, a new volunteer arrived. His name was Caleb, and he was a contractor with a reputation for being both reliable and kind. He immediately caught Marlene's attention. There was something about his calm demeanor and the way he carried himself that made her feel at ease. He wasn't overly charming or forward, but there was a quiet strength in him that drew her in. At first, Marlene thought little of the growing connection between them. She was still reeling from the collapse of her marriage, and the idea of opening her heart to someone else seemed unimaginable. But as the weeks went by, Caleb's presence became more and more comforting. He was supportive of her ideas for the project, and they often spent hours discussing the renovations, the future of the library, and life in general. Caleb's patience with her was something Marlene had rarely experienced before, and it made her feel as though she could be herself again, without the weight of the past dragging her down. Marlene tried to ignore the budding attraction she felt for Caleb. She told herself it was nothing more than a fleeting connection, an emotional response to the pain she had been through. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Caleb made her feel alive again, like a woman who was worthy of love and happiness. Their conversations grew more personal, moving from the surface-level talk about the project to deeper discussions about their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. Caleb listened attentively, never judging, always encouraging. For the first time in a long while, Marlene felt heard and understood. It wasn't long before the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. Caleb didn't try to rush her into anything, but his kindness and steady presence were like a balm for her wounded soul. She began to realize that forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation with the past. Sometimes it meant giving herself permission to embrace the future, to heal, and to open her heart to new possibilities. Marlene was surprised by how easy it had become to talk to Caleb. They spent long afternoons at the library, working side by side as they planned and restored. She found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done in a long time. The chemistry between them was undeniable, but Marlene still fought against it. She wasn't ready to move on, not yet. But one evening, as they sat together on the library's porch, Caleb turned to her with a serious expression. "I know this might sound crazy," he said softly, "but I can't deny that I've developed feelings for you. I understand if you're not ready for anything like that, but I wanted to be honest with you." Marlene was taken aback. She hadn't expected him to be so direct. She hadn't expected to feel the same way. Her heart raced as she tried to process his words. Part of her wanted to pull away, to protect herself from getting hurt again. But another part of her, the part that had been dormant for so long, felt a spark of hope. Could it be possible for her to love again? Could Caleb be the one to help her heal? Marlene's heart was conflicted. On one hand, she was terrified of opening herself up to someone new after the pain of her marriage. On the other, Caleb had shown her a side of love that was patient, understanding, and gentle. He wasn't like Richard, who had taken her for granted and betrayed her trust. Caleb saw her for who she truly was, and he appreciated her strength, her vulnerability, and her ambition. Slowly but surely, she began to trust him. Marlene realized that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. She couldn't erase the pain of the past, but she could learn to move forward. With Caleb by her side, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Marlene was willing to take the next step. As Marlene grew closer to Caleb, she couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that plagued her. She felt as though she was betraying her past, her memories with Richard, and even her own sense of loyalty. It wasn't that she still loved Richard, but there was a lingering sense of duty to her former life. She wasn't sure how to let go of the remnants of her marriage and embrace the possibility of a new relationship with Caleb. Every time they shared a quiet moment or a laugh, the guilt would creep in, leaving her second-guessing her feelings. Caleb, for his part, was patient. He never pushed her, never made her feel like she had to make a decision. He knew that Marlene's journey to healing was something she had to do on her own time. Still, he couldn't help but wonder when the walls would finally come down. Would Marlene ever truly be able to move on, or was she forever tethered to the past? Marlene knew she couldn't continue to live in the limbo of uncertainty. Her heart had begun to open to Caleb, and she couldn't deny the feelings she had developed for him. She realized that her love for Richard, the man who had once been everything to her, had changed. It wasn't love anymore, it was a memory. She needed to let go of the past if she was ever going to embrace the future. The weight of guilt still lingered, but she knew it was time to move forward. One evening, as they stood together in the library, Caleb took her hand. Marlene looked up at Caleb, his hand gently enveloping hers. The library, which had once been a symbol of her struggle and heartbreak, now felt like a place of possibility. Caleb's touch was warm, reassuring. The decision she had been battling with for so long was finally clear. She didn't need to continue holding on to the past. She could forgive herself and choose happiness with someone who cared about her. She could let go. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice trembling with the vulnerability she had never allowed herself to show before. Caleb smiled, his eyes full of understanding. For the first time in months, Marlene felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would be challenging, but she knew she was no longer alone. Marlene looked up at Caleb, his hand gently enveloping hers. The library, which had once been a symbol of her struggle and heartbreak, now felt like a place of possibility. Caleb's touch was warm, reassuring. The decision she had been battling with for so long was finally clear. She didn't need to continue holding on to the past. She could forgive herself and choose happiness with someone who cared about her. She could let go. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice trembling with the vulnerability she had never allowed herself to show before. Caleb smiled, his eyes full of understanding. For the first time in months, Marlene felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would be challenging, but she knew she was no longer alone. Even as Marlene stepped into this new chapter with Caleb, she knew that some ties to her past had to be severed. She needed to confront Richard, not just for closure, but for herself. Their conversation was difficult. Richard tried to apologize again, But Marlene knew his words held no weight anymore. It wasn't about forgiveness for him. It was about reclaiming her life. "You broke my trust, Richard. But I'm no longer angry. I just need to move on," she said, standing firm. There was no bitterness in her voice, only resolve. She left that conversation with a sense of finality. It wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about closure, it was about freedom. As Marlene and Caleb's relationship deepened, she realized that some people from her past weren't as accepting of her moving on. Her friends, especially her closest ones, began to ask questions about Caleb. Was he the right choice? Was she rushing into a new relationship? Marlene understood their concerns, but she wasn't willing to let fear dictate her choices anymore. She needed to live her life on her own terms. Caleb, meanwhile, remained supportive. He understood the weight of Marlene's past, but he wasn't afraid of it. He never tried to replace Richard, but he was more than happy to create a future with her, one step at a time. As their bond grew stronger, Marlene began to notice something about Caleb that unsettled her. He wasn't as open about his own past as she was about hers. When she tried to ask him about his history, Caleb would sidestep the question. It wasn't that he was secretive, but Marlene sensed a wall, one he wasn't ready to bring down. She respected his space, but the curiosity gnawed at her. What had shaped Caleb into the man he was today? Was there something hidden in his past that he wasn't yet ready to confront? Marlene hoped that with time, he would trust her enough to share. Marlene's trust in Caleb grew, but she still struggled with her own insecurities. She had been hurt so deeply before, and the thought of putting herself in a vulnerable position again was terrifying. Yet, Caleb's actions spoke louder than words. He never pressured her, never rushed her, and always respected her boundaries. It was this consistency that gave Marlene the courage to trust him, even when her heart was scared. Their relationship wasn't without its bumps, but with every challenge, they found a way to communicate openly, building a stronger connection. Marlene began to see how love, real love, wasn't about perfection but about mutual respect and understanding. As the months went by, Marlene found herself falling for Caleb in ways she hadn't expected. The quiet moments they shared, whether it was working side by side at the library or sitting together over coffee, felt effortless. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people who enjoyed each other's company and were building something real together. Marlene began to feel a warmth inside her, a sense of belonging that she hadn't known since her marriage. She had spent so long being afraid of being hurt again that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly connect with someone. With Caleb, she was rediscovering that feeling. Not everyone in Marlene's life was thrilled about her blossoming relationship with Caleb. Her sister, in particular, seemed skeptical. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Mar?" she asked one evening over dinner. "You've been through so much with Richard. Do you really think jumping into something new is the answer?" Marlene felt a wave of frustration. She had been so open with Caleb about her past, and now it seemed that even her own family couldn't understand her decision. But Marlene knew that this was her journey, and she didn't need anyone else's approval. She loved Caleb, and she was ready to embrace her future, no matter what anyone else thought. Marlene was forced to confront another painful truth. She was still holding on to bits of resentment toward Richard. While she had forgiven him in her mind, in her heart, there was still a lingering bitterness. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about how she had let him define her happiness for so long. With Caleb's gentle encouragement, Marlene began to actively work on letting go of the anger. She went to therapy, spoke about her feelings openly, and took small steps to break free from the emotional chains that had held her captive. She realized that in order to truly move on, she had to release not just her marriage but the anger and pain that came with it. As Marlene continued to heal, Caleb stood by her. Their relationship was growing stronger, but time would truly test their connection. Caleb had plans to move to a new city for a work opportunity, and the idea of a long-distance relationship had both of them worried. Could their bond survive the distance, or would the time apart create a rift? The decision weighed heavily on both of them. Marlene had found someone who truly understood her, someone who made her feel safe, but could she trust that feeling would last even when they were apart? Caleb assured her that his feelings for her wouldn't change, but Marlene wasn't so sure. She didn't want to lose what they had, but she also didn't want to rush into something that might not work. After much soul-searching, Marlene decided to take a leap of faith. She didn't want to live her life in fear, second-guessing her decisions. Caleb's love was real, and their connection was undeniable. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. They decided to give long distance a try, knowing that it would be difficult but confident that their bond was strong enough to withstand the distance. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Marlene knew that love, real love, required faith and commitment. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to give both. Marlene packed her bags for a visit to Caleb in the new city, knowing that this would be the first test of their long-distance relationship. The thought of being away from her family and friends made her nervous, but she was also excited to experience life with Caleb in a new place. She knew that this trip would help her understand if their relationship could truly withstand the distance. As she stepped off the plane and into Caleb's arms, Marlene realized that this was the beginning of something beautiful. The challenges they would face in the coming months might be tough, but she was ready. For the first time, she felt like she was on the right path, one that led to a future filled with love, healing, and hope. Marlene took Caleb's advice to heart. She began to set boundaries with her work and her personal life. She dedicated time to self-care and spent more quality time with Caleb, who had become her anchor. They began to plan trips to see each other more frequently, and this brought a renewed sense of closeness to their relationship. The time apart made their moments together even more precious. It wasn't just the physical distance that had tested them, but the emotional distance they had unknowingly created by not addressing the underlying strain. Marlene and Caleb had been so focused on external factors that they hadn't realized how much they needed to nurture their emotional connection. This turning point marked the beginning of a stronger, more honest phase in their relationship, built on communication and mutual support. During a visit back to the city, Caleb surprised Marlene with an unexpected question. "How do you really feel about us? About this future together?" Marlene had spent months wondering if she was truly ready to commit to this new life. But the truth was, she had been avoiding facing it head-on. "Caleb, I'm not sure I have all the answers, but I know I want to try. I want to see where this can go," she said, her voice filled with honesty. It was a pivotal moment for both of them. For Marlene, it was about embracing the uncertainty of the future and choosing to face it with someone she truly cared for. For Caleb, it was a confirmation that she was willing to take that leap with him, despite the unknowns. As Marlene continued to find her footing in the new city, she and Caleb began working more closely on the restoration project. The process was not only about rebuilding the physical structure of the library, but also about rebuilding their relationship and learning to collaborate. They realized that working together was one of their strengths. They understood each other's rhythms and priorities, and their shared passion for the community project brought them closer. Marlene found herself thinking less about the past and more about the future. She began to dream of a life with Caleb, not just in the new city, but wherever their shared path would take them. She felt like she had found her place, not in the city itself, but in the life they were building together.